Hi everyone, welcome back to Adore Cream. Welcome back to my 1999 series. Sorry it's been a while. We've talked about the making of the album, basically how the singles affected it and how well the singles did and the album did. We've also talked about the time, about how their impact has happened too. And now we're up to the last two videos of our 1999 series. Today we're going to talk briefly about the promotion and go into the Triple Threat Tour, which is really interesting. And then the final video will be about all the outtakes and stuff. Now, just some quick housekeeping. Purple Army is great. I think it's a great idea. I wish them the best of their luck in their endeavours. Thanks to the Violet Reality and Princess Friend for their updates of Celebration. Sounded like a blast. Really happy about, people want to ask me about the originals. I'm really happy about it. I mean, I think the estate is finally moving in the right direction. Originals sounds wonderful. I can't wait to go out and buy it. I nearly bought a copy of the Rave reissue on vinyl, but at $72 I was a bit hesitant. I'm sure it could be cheaper than that. And finally, Prince's Memoir as well. I have to wait and see on that. I've got another Prince book in called Prince in the Studio by Jake Brown. It's a few years old. It's not bad, but it is littered with mistakes. But anyway, moving on. Promotion of 1999. Now, this can be divided into two areas. Basically, the first part in late 82, early 83 was very much more of the same. Pretty much the album would come out. Warner's would market it to its black music division. It would be marketed to the black audiences. The album would do fairly well, usually have a single, and then a tour would be started to promote the album on the road. Okay, and of course, you had all the usual ads and Billboard and other things. The critics absolutely raved about 1999. They talked about how they loved the electrical sounds. Like they said, it sounded like Africa Bambaataa and Soul Sonic Force, and also a bit of Devo. People saw the new wave credentials. Generally, the reaction was very positive. I mean, some critics did point out, though, they found there was just a bit too much sex in it. And even then, still, that even though Prince was sounding much better, there was still a lot of work to go before he became a truly polished diamond. I mean, as you saw, my chart video talked about how Billboard basically acclaimed the album and also acclaimed the first few singles, 1999, Little Red Corvette and Delirious. Okay, and also, but the thing you have to realise about this early part of promotion is that it was still aiming mostly at Americans and, again, black Americans. There was very little promotion to the global market. Even though Prince was starting to stir around the world, 1999 was hitting in Australia and New Zealand. After all, Australia was the first market to pick up controversy outside the USA. There was a few stirrings in Europe, but really in late 82 it was still mostly America. And even then, white America was the target, basically. But now, more interestingly, I want to talk about the Triple Threat Tour. Basically, Prince's previous tours had been smaller affairs, usually just him and some support act. The controversy was a bit different though, because he'd bought the time on the road with him, and also Zappa plays some venues. Now, the Triple Threat Tour was much bigger in every way. First of all, this is a tour that covered an incredible 93 concerts, which is just astounding. Originally, it was going to be over 102. It could be divided again into two parts. The first part, which basically started on the 11th of November 1982 in Chattanooga, Tennessee, and finished up on the 2nd of January 1983 in Dallas. Okay, this was 36 shows. The interesting thing about this was that sometimes there were 2 shows in the day. Mostly it was like indoor theatres and a couple of stadiums. Again, it was mostly Chitlin circuit, as you saw in my photos there. Those posters are rather Chitlin circuity. And again, places like, Chattanooga, Richmond, New Orleans, they're all very black, It's like, we're going to Soulsville to play to the Soul Brothers type thing. And this was a time when 1999 was a single. The album was at number 23 in the charts. And, it was a successful tour, he was selling out most venues or getting close to. But then there was a second phase, which started in the 29th of January 1983 and went through the 10th of April 1983, and this was much more successful. They played more mainstream cities like Los Angeles, Detroit, and New York. White celebrities started showing up to these shows, like Bruce Springsteen, Bob Seger, and many others, and lots of white people started going into these shows. They started booking bigger halls, so some of them, such as the Pavilion in Chicago, had something like 20,000 people, and it sold out. The shows were bigger, there was more people going to them, and yeah, so let's talk a bit about this tour. This is really interesting. Up to this date, generally Prince had been very convivial with me. Members of his backing groups and other groups on the thing. He was easy to access, but in the late controversy area, as we headed into 82, things changed. Prince brought in basically Big Chick to keep him from everyone else, and with the Triple Threat tour, things got worse. The other thing I haven't even mentioned in the Classix to this date was the role of Prince's manager at the time, Steve Fargnoli. Now, Steve Fargnoli came to Prince at the end of '79 after he got rid of Don Taylor in the sort of Prince-Rick James era. Steve Fargnoli became Prince's greatest gopher. I mean, he was part of the Cavallo-Raffaello organisation, which was handling Prince's affairs, and basically Fargnoli looked after Prince on the road, looked after him in Minneapolis, got him everything he needed, but he also became a buffer between Prince and everyone else in the organisation. And as a result, resentment brewed, and also Prince had Big Chick hanging around him. And Steve was basically there just to keep puffing Prince up and telling him how great he was, and he really did cause a lot of resentment amongst the rest of the bands. Now, we talk about the personnel on this tour. First of all, basically Roy Bennett designed the stage, which was bigger. It had Venetian curtains on stage, you see those. He also had a purple curtain, which was used for the Vanity 6 segment. There was a brass bed. I mean, a lot of the lights and rigs and all the stuff from the Controversy tour was kept, but everything was bigger. There was more room to run around. And the personnel on tour, there was at least 40 roadies, and there were several trucks just carrying stuff from city to city. Basically, the lineup was Prince and the Revolution, and at the time, Prince basically was, of course, he was again mostly doing guitar and singing, but there were some piano breaks. At times, roadies would come and take guitars off him. I don't think this was the stage when guitars were being raised and lowered on strings for when Prince was doing musical numbers. Prince would be doing a lot of dancing. A lot of the critics revered the fact that Prince was dancing more than he was prancing, basically. And then in the Revolution, of course, you had basically the same band as 1981. You had Brown Mark on bass. You had who else? We had Des on guitar. This was Des's last tour off the group, and I'll get to that in a minute. Lisa was playing piano, Bobby on the drums, and Matt Fink on the synths. Also doing backup vocals too was Jill Jones, and you saw her in the Little Red Corvette video and things. And that was Prince's group, and Prince was calling them the Revolution. And then also what you had was The Time. The Time was touring, and that was the classic Time lineup. Morris Day vocals and dancing, Jerome Benton vocals and comic foil, Jesse Johnson guitars, Jellybean Johnson drums, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were doing bass and keyboards, and Monty Moore on keyboards, basically. And then also you had Vanity 6 doing their music. Basically, Vanity 6 would come on stage, they'd sing their songs. That was, of course, Vanity, Brenda Bennett and Susan Moonsey, but behind in a purple curtain, The Time would be playing the musical arrangements to the album, pretty much. So the shows basically went, was called Triple Threat. Basically, on first came Vanity 6, and Vanity 6 really, they just basically did a few songs. They weren't really that well known. They did a 20-minute set, and that mostly was based around the hits like Nasty Girl, 3 Times 2 is 6, Bite the Beat, and He's So Dull. After that, The Time would come on. The Time would perform most of their classic songs off The Time and What Time Is It, including The Walk, 77, 93, 11, which would get absolutely everybody apeshit. Of course, I'd also sing Get It Up, Call, The Stick, and all their higher energy numbers, Wild and Loose. And I mean, The Time became so good that in the second part of the tour, Prince was actually removing them from the bill at times, because in the Time we're doing quite a long set. They were doing 45 minutes on average, whereas Vanity, so already you'd had an hour of music, and I think there was actually quite some long breaks in between the acts. And then the Revolution came on, basically, and they always entered to, they'll be playing the opening chords to Controversy, and also the voice from 1999 going, "Don't worry, I don't want to hurt you, I only want to have some fun." And then basically the band would show up, and they'd always launch into Controversy. Already the song was becoming the big standard opening number. Then they would move into Let's Work, Do Me Baby, With You, How Come You Don't Call Me Anymore, oh god, I can't read my own writing here, Automatic, that's Lady Cab Driver, Automatic, International Lover, and 1999 be a finale. There would also be a piano medley where usually Delirious, Free, Something in the Water, I Want to Be Your Lover would be played, which is really strange, such an old song. And that was the first part of the tour. And the second part of the tour, when Little Red Corvette was taking off as a massive hit, basically International Lover, Little Red Corvette, and Sexuality and Dirty Mind would also be played. So realistically, the set was based very heavily on the past 4 albums. I mean, there was a lot of 1999, but there wasn't all of it. A lot of the songs came off Dirty Mind and Controversy, and he was playing songs from Prince. Because especially in the second part, a lot of the audience, they probably hadn't heard of Prince since I Want to Be Your Lover. So Prince wanted to say, hey, I'm the guy who made that song too, basically. And from what I heard, the average show was 55 to 70 minutes. It was quite long. The second part of the tour, the shows got longer and better, basically. So this was a big tour. Now, the tour dynamics were very interesting. previously in the past there'd been no more than 2 buses basically. Prince of one bus and the rest of the Revolution in the other. This time around there was at least 4 buses, sometimes 3 or 4. Generally the last bus, I mean the last vehicles would be all the roadies and stuff who'd be travelling in trucks and things, carrying the rigs and all that stuff. Then there'd be a tour bus which would contain members of the Time and Vanity 6. Then there was a bus for members of the Revolution basically, and then Prince, who was turning into Napoleon at the time, had a bus for himself, and usually travelling on that bus was him, Big Chick, Steve Fargnoli, and usually either Vanity or some other girl Prince had picked up on the route, and also an actress known as Troy Bayer. Sometimes even Jill Jones was brought on the bus, so Prince was getting pretty jealous. Most of the time Jill Jones would be hanging out on the bus with the Revolution. Also another thing at this time too, especially in the second part of this tour, basically Des was getting frustrated. He joined the Born Again church group. He was getting frustrated with playing songs like Head and, you know, Do It All Night and Do Me Baby on stage because he felt they were sexually disgusting. And what was happening was that Lisa, who brought her friend Wendy Melvoin on the tour with her, Wendy was staying in hotels rooms with her and she was playing guitar notes. And the story goes that one day at time during the second part, Lisa was in her room in the hotel. Prince came past and was about to have a band meeting or something and saw Wendy playing, and he said, "Wow, you're funky. I didn't know you could play that song." And she said, "I know how to play all of them." And Prince said, "Yes, I'm going to remember that." So pretty much as soon as the tour was over, Des left the group, and Prince basically said to Wendy, "Look, here's the albums, learn the music, you're in the band if you want it." And as we all know, Wendy went on stage at the famous Makings of Rain concert in August 1983. So that's how it went. The tour overall was an absolute massive success. It was one of the biggest touring acts of 1983. Basically, it made over $10 million. It cemented Prince's status in the USA. Whereas in the first part I talked to you, how about it was all the Chitlin circuit and basically, just putting ads in Billboard and things. By the end of the tour, it was basically Little Red Corvette rising in the charts. That and the 1999 video being played on MTV. Plus the fact that just generally black music, thanks to acts like Michael Jackson, Rick James and Lionel Richie, was catching on. I was going around word of mouth. It's like, hey, Prince is playing, let's go to the show. And as you can see in the posters and in the photo section, you can clearly see the prices to get into these shows. It was very cheap, like you're talking like $10, $12, which back in the 80s was almost nothing. I mean, especially for what you were seeing. Basically, what you're getting was a show that lasted over 2 hours, and it was just non-stop action. Okay, so it was a great show. I mean, this tour really sold Prince. It really just drove him into the mainstream. That coupled with the hit singles, I mean, that was just moving copies of the album. After all, it was all this work Prince was putting into it that basically turned, that would have turned 1999 from just being another album that went gold and was another black hit, to being something that became a massive pop crossover and went triple platinum, pretty much. I mean, this was an album that was just selling like hotcakes, thanks to, and people could see the amount of work going on stage. I mean, like I'd said in an earlier video, Prince was insisting that everybody in every group, the Time, the Revolution, and Vanity 6, didn't just have to be singing the songs, they had to be dancing, they had to be playing the instrument, they had to be stepping, they had to be performing on stage. And Vanity 6, they weren't quite well so received because they were just basically singing in their gout, fishnet and lingerie, going, "Oh, don't you want to be, don't you think I'm a nasty girl?" But the Time, as you know, they were putting on a rollicking good show, and the Revolution were kicking ass. And this is also another time too when Prince, I mean, I don't mean to bag Prince, but Prince was turning into an arsehole. He was like barring people for $10 for missing a step or missing a musical cue. He'd look at them and he'd go, "I saw that." And then the other thing he was doing by this stage too was after every show, the next day Prince was taping these shows and he was playing them back and watching them. And not only was he watching them to see where he could improve on the performances and how to resequence songs, because the set list did get jiggled around during the tour, Prince was also watching out for any musician that was not, basically doing as they were supposed to be doing. And he would bring people up going, "Lisa, I saw you hit that chord wrong there. I don't want that rhythm in there. You ruined that song. That's a $50 fine." So you can imagine what that would have been like after. I love Prince's music, but if the brother asked me to work for him, I'd be like, "Oh, hell no." So there was a lot of that shit going on. And probably the worst thing that happened though was in March of '83, towards the end of the tour, Jimmy Jam and Terry Lewis were getting into the whole production thing. They knew they had a future as producers. And what happened was Prince basically had a rule: while you're in the Time, no outside shit, basically. But there was actually a break in the tour. There was about 2 or 3 days, and they decided to fly to Atlanta and work on some tracks with a group called the SOS Band, and they all had a massive hit called Just Be Good to Me. Anyway, the song they produced ended up becoming a hit, and Prince got suspicious anyway. But they did another song, and what happened though, even though it was a mild winter, in March of 1983 there was a freak snowstorm which snowed them in Atlanta, and they could not catch the plane to the next time show. And as a result they arrived late, and apparently I heard some story that Prince and Dez had to step in and do their roles. No, it was Prince and Matt. Prince was playing bass and Matt was on the keyboards. And I mean, the fans like weren't even noticing, like, oh my god, is that Prince playing the bass in the time? You know. And anyway, well, Prince brought them in. He didn't say nothing to them at the time. Basically, he was like, yeah, well, you're late. That's a fine. Get on stage next time. And they thought, oh, we got off. But at the end of the tour, because the show was only a couple of weeks before the end of the tour, Prince called them into a room. He said, brothers, you know what I said about this outside production? And basically handed them their slips, and they were gone. And of course, I'll talk about it in another video, but that was the beginning of the end for the Time, pretty much, because the Time by this stage, they were like a family. And the other resentment too was that the Time were doing so good, they were kicking Prince's ass every night. It was like what Prince was doing on the Rick James tour 3 years earlier, and Prince took them off the bill on big shows like New York and Los Angeles. No reason was given, but Prince was realizing that some of the fans in the audience, especially in the black audiences who really were getting deeper into the Time, were getting bored by the time Prince and the band came on. And he didn't want that. He wanted people to be there. Prince was the star. The Time were basically, as far as they were concerned, they were a support act. Even though Prince had created them, this was basically free bands. They're doing all of Prince's music on stage. Prince's ego had to be satisfied, and this was just too much. So it was also beginning resentment. And also, apparently, at the end of the last show, which was at the where was it? It was at the Lakeland Forum, I think. There was another food fight, just like the year earlier when there was the one where Prince chained up Jesse Johnson for insulting his mother and threw Doritos at him. There was a big food fight. There were pies flying across the stage. Basically, Prince's group ambushed the Time. He gave them an order that while the revolution was on, they were not to be ambushed, but the Time came across with all these cream pies, and a big fight started. Apparently, the fight carried on back in the hotel, and things got quite heated, but not much more was said. I mean, basically, the damage already done. The Time were annoyed. And also, too, the Time were pissed off because they were not getting paid for or credited for playing the background music to Vanity 6 on stage. And at this time still, the Time were not getting much more than $145 Prince was paying them in the controversy era. I think at this stage they were on about $200 a week, and Morris Day was getting maybe a few dollars more. They also too, the Time were incredibly talented musicians, and it was still really, Prince was still doing all the music. At this stage, Prince already started writing bits of the third album, basically Ice Cream Castle. And I think he was a wee bit annoyed, and they didn't really want to go out and play, you know, behind Vanity 6, which they saw really as just a joke. So that's the Triple Threat tour. Basically, huge success in public, but in private it was a flop. It was the beginning of kind of like, you know, this us versus them mentality. Like I said, you know, Chick and Steve were earning. Steve didn't really care about. There was one book I read, I can't remember which one. I think it was one of the old ones. Basically, I think it might have been someone like Lisa and Wendy, but they said that. And please, if I get this wrong, I apologize. They said that they didn't like Steve. Steve didn't care about any of the band members. All he cared about was Prince and his money, basically. And I mean, it was pretty true. I mean, Prince kept him on right up to the Love Sexy tour, then fired him after that. But on the positive side, though, Steve got things done. I mean, he really looked out for Prince. He cared about Prince. And to a lesser degree, Chick did too, and of course, Tula. And this whole tour, I mean, I know I've talked about all this craziness going on, but it was nothing compared to what happened on the Purple Rain tour. But still, there was definitely a proving ground. It was a learning experience for everyone. And in true Prince style, by April when it had ended, I mean, Little Red Corvette was basically in the top 20. You know, I mean, he was going to have another hit with Delirious. He had all this music coming out. Basically, the promotional side was taken care of. Warners were happy. There was enough money coming in. Anything that advanced to Prince was coming back in buckets. Prince was getting richer. The bands were at least working. And May 1983, the story changes when Prince started writing things down in a purple notebook. He brought over a serene writer called William Blinn, and he was basically asking everyone in the two groups, Vanity 6 and the Time, saying, look, we're entering a really big project. I need your commitment. And he started making people take acting classes, and no one had any idea why. Okay, and pretty much this is what, you know, caused Dez to leave, and of course later on Vanity left. Okay, in the next video I'm going to talk more about Vanity 6 and the whole Vanity Prince thing. I mean, and in the meantime, though, I mean, Peace, Love and Prince has done a wonderful video about Vanity. He's done a wonderful series of videos about all the women in Prince's life. As you can see, we're talking about Vanity right there. Yep, and it's just going to be great, I think. Yeah, see right there. Yep. Oh man, got my finger over there's Prince and Vanity from the era. And finally, the other thing too was Prince was going to play a European show in London at a place called the Dominion Theatre in May, but I think there was something wrong with the planning permits or something, and the show never went ahead. So there you are. That's the Triple Threat tour. Take care. May you all live to see the dawn. And yeah, I mean, next video will be about outside projects and unreleased tracks. And then we say goodbye to 1999 and we move into Purple Rain.